What is the meaning of life? In the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, a group of hyper-intelligent, pan-dimensional beings wants to answer that question. But with all of their intelligence, they're surprised. They still have no clue what they call is the answer for the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything. In order to solve the problem, they do what they know best. They build an incredible computer. The computer is called Deep Thought, and they hope that it will be able to solve all enigmas of human existence. Once Deep Thought is operating and is asked what the question of the meaning of life is, it says, to everyone's surprise and disappointment, that it needs a little bit of time to think about it. 7.5 million years. And the time passed, and the time passed, and the time passed. And eventually it is time. Everyone gathers anxiously to hear deep thoughts coming from Deep Thought. The computer's ready, the drums roll, and the answer is 42. 42, everyone seems to ask themselves and look at each other with confusion. Hearing their disappointment, Deep Thought says that the reason they don't understand 42 as an answer to the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything is simple. For that question, he doesn't need time to answer. He says, the question was not good enough. The answer 42 is funny, because on one hand, we have no clue of what it means or how the computer got to that result. But on the other hand, isn't that precisely what we do in our lives? We search for numbers, for the exact, for equations. If I do this, then that will happen. We live by recipes. We follow guidelines. We rely on the ways to get from point A and point B in the city of Los Angeles, and we rely on IKEA instructions to build our furniture. But there's more to life than manuals and formulas. In a sense, we too don't know which question is the right one. And we keep framing our living in the measurable and quantifiable. Living is not as simple and objective as mathematics. There are better questions to ask than what and how. Martin Buber wrote that human existence is twofold. On one hand, we live in the world of I-it, the world of experiences and objects. But there's also the world of I-thou, the world of relationships. If we engage with people as I-it, we see them as its, as numbers only. We want one result, and we engage with the other with the sole purpose of getting it. This is a utilitarian way of living that, although necessary, does not correspond to all of the complexity of living. The questions of what and how belong in the world of I-it. The world of relationships of I-thou allows a level of connection between one and the other that is both deep and rich. With relationships, there are no whats or hows, because there are no objects. There are no equations. The question is why. It is a question that searches for meaning out of the depths of subjectivity. It is not a request for an instruction, but the invitation to share on an existential quest. We need to reshape the way that we search for answers. The exact and quantifiable are not enough to understand the beautiful complexity and dynamism of human living. 42 is and can never be an acceptable answer. But unfortunately, we do that. We default to I-it, since numbers add pressure to our schedule. And we let that tension permeate our vision of our roles as rabbis, too. We all heard or said, we need to outreach to members of our community. We need to fill our classrooms and programs. But people still don't come. And communities continue to search for the right program that will be able to attract numbers. We ask, what do we need to do so that people will come? Instead of, why is it that people are not coming? The latter is not a search for a formula, but for meaning. We often focus on congregants as numbers, and not on congregants as people. And by doing so, what meaning are we actually adding to their living? The challenge before us is not new. One example of how Judaism creates this understanding may be found in the way that we relate to this week's Torah portion. The text is pretty methodical. It tells one what to do and how to do it to get it done. It gives answers. In fact, the whole book of Leviticus could be seen as the same. It delineates every single possible detail of temple worship. There's a problem, though. The temple was destroyed. Everything that in religious life surrounded temple worship had to be reshaped and reframed. Pilgrims once would travel huge distances before the time of airlines and frequent flyer programs, all the way to Jerusalem to be a part of those rituals. And then Jerusalem was destroyed. There's a story in Avot that Rabbi Natan, a Midrash text, that talks about this moment of our history. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is walking along with another one of our sages, Rabbi Yehoshua. When they passed through the ruins of the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, Yehoshua puts his hands on his head and says, "Oy, oy, oy! Oy to us, whose holy temple was destroyed, the place where we would get our sins atoned." Yochanan ben Zakkai answered, "Don't worry. We have another way of atoning for our misdeeds. Gemilut chasadim, acts of kindness." The rabbis had to get creative. Could it be that the connection between God and humans was forever lost with the destruction of the temple? No. That simply was not an option. They created the concept of avodah shebalev, of worship of the heart. Prayers, offering one's soul. According to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, acts of loving kindness too are a way of substituting the role that the temple had. Institutions get destroyed and may die, but the yearning of the soul does not. That yearning is eternal. That spiritual thirst exists beyond buildings and institutions. This is an example of a change in perspective. The temple was programmatic. The temple was programmatic. It offered local services that could not be offered anywhere else to attract customers. With its absence, the personal search for programs becomes the personal search for meaning. There still are programs. The rabbis created rituals in the resemblance of temple worship, like our prayers. But now one needs to feel compelled personally to participate. Instead of just bringing animals passively to be sacrificed, now we are actively the ones responsible for performing rituals. Each person matters. It is about people and not numbers. People become the focus of religious endeavor, instead of the programs implemented by the priests. Self-awareness, responsibility, and relationship building become ways of worshiping God. And so today, as Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, Rabbi Yehoshua, and all of the sages of that generation, we too ponder in our communities what we need to do in order to bring people to programs and keep our institutions running. How can we get 20s and 30s to engage? What does it take to ensure strong Jewish identity? This is all an expression of the same desires of the pan-dimensional beings of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. We want to know what to do. We search for mathematics. How much? How many? And what are the answers? Formulas. 42. Jewish camping. Happy hour. But everything needs to remain in perspective. It is not about programs, but about people. We are asking the wrong questions. This year, I met a man in a Los Angeles synagogue whose car has been parked in the temple's parking lot for a long period of time. He was in a car accident, and his insurance did not cover the repairs. He and his wife share now one car. To complement his salary, in the weekends he works as a clown in parties. And his family comes along, waiting inside the car while he performs. That's how he spends his weekends. That's how he spends the little time that he has with his family. How many people talk to that person every day? Dozens. How many people know his story? Only a select few. We move around so fast and miss so many stories and so many opportunities to relate and connect. Our congregations become full of staff people, lay leaders, and congregants. But we forget that what our congregations are full of is people. How different would our communities be if instead of engaging with the I-it word of hows and whats, we would focus on the word of relationships? Then we will be asking why. We will be reaching out to people instead of reaching out to members. We wouldn't evaluate our success by counting how many congregants attend each program, but rather we would evaluate our success by how deep our relationships are with those that we meet and serve. We would engage directly with Yochanan ben Zakkai and look beyond stones and concrete. We would look to those that we serve as partners instead of numbers. We would look for establishing meaningful relationships instead of business transactions. Religion cannot become a business. Please don't get me wrong. Programs are not counterproductive. In fact, I do think that we have to keep as many different doors open that lead to an active community life as possible. And programs are an excellent way of keeping those doors open. But we need to restructure the way that we create programs. As rabbis to be, we need to focus on establishing relationships with those that we meet and serve, and then create programs. We should not be creating programs and then hope that we will establish some relationships along the way, because relationships do not happen along the way. The answer to what the meaning of community life is should not and cannot be a mere formula for the perfect program. 42. I decided to ask Siri in my iPhone what the meaning of life was. And she answered many different interesting things. I don't believe there is a consensus on that question. That's news for me, Siri. I give up. All evidence to date suggests it's chocolate. I don't know, but I think there's a map for that. And my favorite? Asking questions like these. We cannot give up. We need to keep asking questions like these. At the end of the day, the ultimate question for the meaning of life, the universe, and everything is, what gives meaning to your life? Or how can I be part of that? And most importantly, will you be part of my journey as well? Boker Tov.